مهندس فتحت الشرائح معك ولا باقي؟
دكتور هذا العرض تبعك بإمكانك تبدأ.
طيب كم شريحة؟ 5 شرائح.
إثراء للمحتوى التربوي
في قفل هذا قفل. خلاص ممتاز جدا ممتاز. طيب نبدأ الآن.
نعم نبدأ. توكل على الله يا دكتور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد، في هذه الليلة المباركة من ليالي رمضان نستكمل معكم سلسلة اللقاءات التربوية التي ينظمها مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، ونحن في اللقاء الثالث، وعنوان هذا اللقاء هو معالجة الفاقد التعليمي باستخدام استراتيجية التعلم المقلوب. وبداية أنقل لكم تحيات وترحيب معالي المدير العام الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي، كافة الزملاء في مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، ونرحب بضيفنا في هذه الأمسية وفي هذا اللقاء السيد جون بيرغمان، وسيحدثنا إن شاء الله في هذه الليلة عن التعلم المقلوب وأدوار المعلم والطالب فيه، وما هي معايير التعلم المقلوب، وكيف يصمم أو كيف نصمم بيئة تعلم مقلوب فاعلة. وسيستعرض أيضا معنا عرضا لأبرز نماذج استراتيجيات التعلم المقلوب، وكيف يمكن توظيف استراتيجيات التعلم المقلوب في معالجة الفاقد التعليمي. ولا شك أن توظيف التكنولوجيا في التعليم لها تزايد في الأهمية مع استمرار الاهتمام بتوظيف تكنولوجيا التعليم في العملية التعليمية، سواء في ما حدث قبل تعليم الأزمات أو أزمة كورونا، أو أيضا كذلك ما حدثته أزمة كورونا في الاهتمام بتكنولوجيا التعليم. تعطيني الشريحة الثانية بس. وأيضا كذلك بداية دعوني أن أعرف بضيفنا في هذا اللقاء. ضيفنا هو السيد جون بيرغمان، هو أحد رواد التعلم المقلوب في العالم، حيث قام بتأليف 10 كتب، بما في ذلك الكتاب الأكثر مبيعاً Flip Your Classroom، الذي تمت ترجمته إلى 10 لغات، وكذلك له أكثر من 15 بحثاً منشورة. ويعد جوناثان هو مؤسس لمؤتمرات الفليب كون العالمية، وأيضا كذلك يعمل معلما للكيمياء لأكثر من 25 عاما. يستضيف جون برنامجا إذاعيا يسمى The Flip Side، والذي يحقق حاليا أكثر من 30,000 تنزيل شهريا، ولديه أيضا قناة في اليوتيوب شهيرة لأكثر من 3 ملايين مشاهدة خلال منذ تأسيسها. حصل جوناثان على الجائزة الرئاسية للتميز في تدريس الرياضيات والعلوم، وأيضا تم اختياره لجائزة أفضل مدرس في كولورادو، وهو عضو في المجلس الاستشاري لتيد إديوكيشن في عام 2013. تم اختياره كواحد من أكثر 10 أشخاص تأثيرا في العالم لذلك العام، وكان أيضا أحد المرشحين لجائزة بروك الدولي للتعليم، والفائز بجائزة بامي لعام 2013 التي قدمتها أكاديمية الفنون والعلوم التربوية. طبعا المكتب يتشرف، الشريحة اللي بعدها صلاح، المكتب يتشرف بأنه ترجم 3 كتب لجوناثان بيرغمان. هذه الكتب هي تعد من الكتب التي لاقت استحسانا وقبولا لدى مستفيدين في الدول الأعضاء: التعلم المقلوب، والصف المقلوب، وحل مشكلة الواجب المنزلي بالتعلم المقلوب. وللوصول إلى هذه الإصدارات وإلى غيرها من الإصدارات أنشأ مكتب التربية العربي موقعا للإصدارات يعد المنفذ الوحيد لجميع إصدارات مكتب التربية، وأيضا كذلك للمراكز التابعة. تعلمون أن للمكتب 3 مراكز: المركز العربي للبحوث التربوية في دولة الكويت، والمركز العربي للتدريب التربوي في دولة قطر، والمركز التربوي للغة العربية في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. وكل إصدارات هذه المراكز أيضا تقع أو موجودة في موقع إصدارات المكتب. واسمحوا لي بعرض بسيط حول الموقع، موقع إصدارات المكتب. الشريحة اللي بعدها صلاح. هذا عرض فيديو يستعرض معكم حول جهود المكتب في إصدارات ما في صوت يا صلاح.
العلمي ومساعدة لصناع القرار. بالاستناد إلى جديد المعرفة التربوية، طور مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج منفذاً إلكترونياً يتيح وصول فئات ومنسوبي التعليم في الدول الأعضاء إلى جميع إصداراته، حيث تتنوع إصدارات المكتب لتشمل كافة عناصر المنظومة التعليمية والمجالات التربوية المختلفة: رياض أطفال، الطفولة المبكرة، سياسات تربوية، الإدارة التربوية، المناهج وطرق التدريس، التربية الخاصة والموهوبون، علم النفس التربوي، تكنولوجيا التعليم، المواطنة، التقويم التربوي، مهارات التفكير. وتشمل إصدارات المكتب الكتب العربية والكتب المترجمة من دور النشر العالمية المتميزة بهدف نقل النظريات العلمية والأدلة التطبيقية وأفضل التجارب والممارسات التربوية الحديثة. وللحصول على الإصدارات يمكنكم الدخول لصفحة إصدارات المكتب عبر بوابة المكتب. إصدارات مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، مرجع تربوي.
الشريحة اللي بعدها صلاح. طبعا موقع إصدارات المكتب، موقع إصدارات المكتب هذه تقريبا هذا باركود يتيح الوصول إلى مركز الإصدارات وطلب يعني كل الإصدارات التي معروضة في الموقع. الموقع مثل ما ذكرت لكم يضم كافة إصدارات المكتب وأيضا كذلك المراكز التابعة له، ويمكن طلب هذه الإصدارات وتصلكم أينما كنتم من خلال المراكز أو من خلال نقاط الوصول التي موجودة في الموقع. اسمحوا لي الآن أن أنتقل إلى ضيفنا وأن أرحب به مرة أخرى، وسنبقى معه خلال الساعة القادمة للحديث حول موضوع هذا اللقاء وأيضا كذلك المحاور التي تم الإعلان عنها في إعلان الدورة وأيضا كذلك تناولناها في بداية الحديث. فمرحبا بك جوناثان معنا باسم الزملاء، باسم معالي المدير في المكتب وباسم جميع الزملاء نرحب بك، وتفضل الميكروفون الآن لك.
Well, it is great to be with you all. I'm excited to share with you guys about flipped learning and how flipped learning can change everything. It really is amazing. I'm deal here. So thanks for having me. You know, I know that as we look at what's been going on in the world, that it has been very difficult. We have faced an unprecedented challenge with the COVID attacking the world. It's been a very difficult time, and I know that many of you, I'm just humbled as I look at the number of people here. What was it? There's over 300 people here to hear this, and my hat is off to you. It's very late, I know, in the Middle East, and I'm very excited to share with you guys about how we can transform education. And I want us to ask a very interesting question as we begin. And the question is this, is how do we design classrooms that will help all students? So we've all got students. I know many of you are teachers. Some of you are principals, administrators. I know many of you are also even like on the ministries of education. And what I am about to share with you, I think will transform, I know I've seen it happen all over the world, transforms classrooms all over the world. So as I think about education, I think that if you were to, and I'm a simplifier here. So as I think about education, I think there are three big buckets that we think about when we think about changing education. The first one is curriculum. Of course, that's what we teach. And curriculum is dependent upon where you live. The curriculum in your country is different than the curriculum in the United States. And so this is determined by governments and by societies and what we deem as important for our students. The second one is assessment. Of course, well, how do we know that they've learned the things that we want them to learn, right? Our curriculum. And the third one, though, is the one that we're really going to focus in on, and that is pedagogy. And of course, pedagogy addresses this question. It addresses the question of how do we teach? And if we think back to these three things, curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy, if you look at what's happened in the last, I don't know, I've been teaching, I've been in education since 1986. So in my almost 40 years in education, we have focused on curriculum and assessment, and we've not focused on pedagogy, the how we teach. And I think what we need to do is to change our focus. I'm not saying changing our curriculum isn't important. I believe there's been a lot of great work around the world, as I've talked with, work more closely here with United States curriculum people, but in specifics, even all over the world, as I work with leaders in Argentina and China and all over the world, I have discovered that what you teach is important. But I think what we can change, the thing that will totally transform everything, is to change how we teach. And let me illustrate that with a series of images. What are schools designed for? Honestly, we all know what they're designed for, because this is what a classroom looked like 100 years ago. And this is what a classroom looked like in 2019. Now, notice I said 2019 because the whole world changed in 2020, right? But let's think, what did classrooms look like in 2019? So crazy. If you Google the word classroom followed by these country, you know what they look like? This is what a classroom looks like in the United States, in Taiwan, in Japan, Uganda, China. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? India, the Himalayan mountains, Vietnam, Peru, in rich countries, in developing countries, maybe in your own professional development. So that's 2019. So, all right, let's fast forward to 2020. What if you say COVID and you school? What do they look like? What have schools look like in 2020, let's say 2021? Here's one in Taiwan and Argentina. This was the University of Oklahoma after COVID, Pantheon University, France, Japan, the University of Kentucky, South Korea, Indonesia. And so what are we facing? What is it that's happened in the last few years? And you have faced this yourself. I am facing that myself. I continue to teach, right? So I've taught this week. I will teach on Monday. I have students like many of you. I am a simple teacher, just like so many of you, all right? But what I'm arguing is that, and we all know this, is that we're seeing significant learning gaps in our students. So some statistics, I wasn't able to find any ones necessarily from your region, but here are some data from the Western Hemisphere. It talks about the learning gaps among students, and long story short is students are significantly behind. I don't know if you're seeing this, that they're very far behind in their academics. Not only behind their academics, but something we've seen in the US, I don't know if it's been true in your region, but we've seen significant mental health struggles with our students. In the United States, there's been a 71% increase in mental health issues since the beginning of the pandemic. And here's some of those concerns of health, difficulty concentrating, disruptions in their sleeping patterns. Because we went online, now our students are isolated at home. And I know how important it is that we have social interactions with each other. And if all that happens only online, we are missing out significantly on the needs of our students. And so my guess is that you are also experiencing some of those things. What are you seeing in terms of the mental health issues of your students? And so how do we meet those needs? What is the answer? And I believe the answer, this is a bold statement, the answer is going to be flipped learning. This is crazy. Can flipped learning solve the pandemic problems that you're facing in your classes today? Now, maybe you're like me and you're back at school. So I see my students now and we are finally no masks. We recently been able to take masks off. So I see my students every day. Excuse me. But I've also discovered that they have significant gaps. I've seen more cognitive, they've missed out on certain concepts. I've seen it in both mathematics, also in terms of their abstract thinking skills are stunted based on what I used to see in the years gone by. These are my anecdotal observations as a teacher. I've seen some significant gaps. I've certainly seen, from the mental health perspective, I've seen more students with mental health issues than I have ever before in my whole career. And so I do believe that the pandemic has not just taken a toll physically on our overall health in terms of the COVID disease coming around the world, but also in terms of the mental health of our students. So why do I say flipped learning is the answer? First of all, I just want to quickly say that there's a ton of research that says this works. If you were to, I think last I looked, there were over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies that prove that flipped learning works. Some of the studies, there's been some recent studies that have been talking about flipped learning in the pandemic and also showing that it is much more effective than, if you will, traditional learning. I'm sure I don't know what that means anymore when we talk about in the pandemic and through the pandemic and now post-pandemic. And now the research is showing, and if you didn't already know this, but Harvard Medical School has decided to flip. That's right, Harvard Medical School has flipped. I had a chance to visit this classroom. This is Dr. Richard Swartzstein's classroom, and what an amazing time I got to spend with him. This is before the pandemic, and what they're doing at Harvard with flipped learning is just groundbreaking work. But not only at Harvard, I had a chance to visit a school in Iceland, and they have completely flipped. They went from one of the lowest schools in the country in terms of academic achievement to one of the highest by flipping. It's just actually a school for students who struggle. So it wasn't a school for high achievers, like say Harvard. It was a school for low achievers, and it worked. So here we've got a school, Harvard Medical School, maybe one of the most difficult universities in the world to get into. And then we've got a school for actually dropouts, students who had dropped out of school and were coming back to get additional help. Another place that I think is very interesting where flipped learning has taken off is MEF University in Istanbul in Turkey. And there's been some amazing things happening there. And let's actually take a listen and hear what they're doing at MEF University in Istanbul.
It's some very different education system in our university. Teachers make videos and upload, and we watch them before we come to class, and so with that we can be prepared for the class.
You're doing your own job like you're gonna do in real life. It's really different.
Hold on.
Really different, engaging, involving, and it's pretty easy to use.
I already know the subjects, and I already know my weaknesses about the subject.
My experience with flipped classroom since I joined MEF University has confirmed all these positive aspects associated with flipped learning. I have realized that students learn and engage far more effectively in an interactive flipped environment.
So MEF University was the first fully flipped university. So I gave examples from universities, but I teach in secondary, and I've seen it work in secondary schools. I have another example. I didn't throw up a picture or a slide, but there are full-on primary schools who have completely adopted flipped learning. Flipped learning works. It works at Harvard Medical School. It works at schools for dropouts. It works at secondary schools. It works at primary schools. It works in engineering. It works in mathematics. It works in interesting story in Argentina. I helped a project in Argentina where they started the flipped learning. It's actually the largest flipped instance in the world. The province of Misiones, Argentina, completely has flipped, and they did this before the pandemic. And they started with their students in what we would call here in the U.S. the vocational schools. So these are schools that are teaching students things like mechanics, agriculture, plumbing, electricians. So that's where they started it. That it's now morphed into all of their K-12 education system. So anyways, we know it works. So what is it? Maybe you've read some of my books that have been translated by ABEGs. Maybe you've just heard about it, but you don't know what it is. So let me just give you what I think is the easiest way to understand flipped learning. And when you're trying to understand flipped learning, I want you to think about Bloom's taxonomy. Of course, it's just here. You can see it on the screen. And you've got the low levels of Bloom's: remembering, understanding, applying. And of course, it gets more cognitively difficult the higher you go. So if you had been in my class in those first 19 years before I flipped my class, I was a traditional teacher for 19 years. I spent most of my class time lecturing. I stood up and I taught my students. I presented new material. I taught them chemistry and physics and different science classes that I've taught, geology and whatever I was teaching them. But the beauty of flipped learning, and let me actually say this. So if you think of Bloom's taxonomy as time, right? I spent most of my time at the remembering and understanding level. And then I sent my students home to apply, analyze, evaluate, create. Now, I hope you realize that that's all backwards. The reason that's backwards is because what are students going to struggle on? They're going to struggle on applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So if you think of flipped learning, what you do is you flip Bloom's taxonomy upside down, right? And when you think it upside down, then you spend more class time. This is important. Class time on the hard stuff. That's the big idea, guys. I mean, if you get that, where will students struggle? So when my students come to class on Monday, I'll see my students on Monday, they will, in theory, have watched a video or read some stuff. Actually, this weekend, they're watching a video. They're going to watch a video on the topic of, say, chemical bonding. That's what they're watching over the weekend. And then they're going to be doing activities related to chemical bonding in class, activities that are challenging, that are from a Bloom's taxonomic perspective at the top of Bloom's. And the more I've thought, by the way, of the shape of Bloom's taxonomy, I actually don't like the shape we have on the screen. In one of my books that I published, I introduced the idea of the Bloom's diamond, where the bulk of class time is spent in the middle of Bloom's taxonomy at the applying and analyzing level. I don't think it's realistic, at least for K through 12 classrooms, let's say, to spend the bulk of their class time in the top of Bloom's, but to spend the bulk of their time in the middle. And so hear me carefully. Sometimes it's kind of weird. Right now I'm giving you a lecture about not lecturing. You get that there's a little irony there. Isn't that weird? But I still believe in lecture, because if you were to go to my YouTube channel, you would see all of my lectures. They're these short little 6 to 12 minute videos that my students are watching this weekend, right? My students might be watching them as we speak. They're taking notes on it, and they're going to come to class, and we're going to apply and analyze what they've watched. And let me introduce now a couple of terms that are often used in the flipped learning world, and that is both the independent versus the group space. So if you think about this, the independent space is what students do alone, and the group space is what they do in a group. And the idea from Bloom's taxonomy, again, to go back to this, is I want them to do the easy stuff when they're by themselves. That's the remembering and understanding. That's the independent space. That's the information transfer. That's the introduction to new material. But when they are together in the group space, then they're going to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And let me also say this about independent and group space. Independent and group space doesn't have to happen in a physical classroom. So when we went completely online, I'm sure many of you, in fact, all of you probably went completely online, especially say March of 2020 or whatever, when the pandemic really took off, and we were all doing remote. I was teaching from my room like this. to my students, and they were in a Zoom room or whatever it was. And this still works, right? So my students were still able to do the pre-learning activity, which could have been a video or could have been a reading. I do both, by the way, depends on the lesson. And then the students would be in a group space, but the group space doesn't have to necessarily be in the same physical space. So the shift to online learning for me was not that big of a deal, because when I moved to online learning, I was able to say, well, I mean, we're just going to have our group space and we're going to do it on a Zoom room. There were some things that changed, especially as a science teacher. I had to figure out them to do experiments. And so we got creative, and with my physics students, they were designing experiments in their bathtubs with water and waves. And we did what we did, right? I mean, that's how we taught it. It's definitely better if they have better quality scientific equipment available to them in my context, or, you know, whatever, but it worked. In fact, in terms of the pandemic, I heard a quote on Twitter from one of the flipped learning leaders. And what she said is, she said, you know, the pandemic, what flipped learning teachers have been preparing for the past 10 years. All right, so I've introduced flipped learning, but flipped learning can also be done poorly. There was a research study done, I want to say now we're about 2 to 3 years out now, by a Taiwanese professor. And he made a comment, and he said something to the effect that flipped learning is an easy method to get wrong. It's easy to not do it well. Many teachers, maybe even some of you flip, you think you flipped, or you did flip, but you flipped by just sending a video home. And that's not bad, but there are ways to flip well. And so it's now not a mystery. If you look at the research on flipped learning, the research is now talking about what are the best strategies to flipping well. And I want to share with you what I would say are the top 10 ways to flip well. And the way I'm going to do that is a bit weird. I'm going to talk about the ways not to flip well. So obviously the opposite is true. So it'll be obvious that then, you'll see. So I would say number 10, right? If you make your videos too long, you're doing it wrong. Assuming you're doing videos, you don't want us to do videos, but you want them into bite-sized chunks. Make it short. Make it short. And I've made that mistake. My own daughter, who's now a teacher, but when we were first starting flipped learning in 2007 and 2008, she was actually in my class, and she came home from school one day and she said, "Dad, really? A 20-minute video?" We'd made a video that was too long, and she called me out on it. And so my videos now are 7 to 12 minutes long. And actually, recently I made a 20-minute video, and I heard about it from my students. So you say, well, I got more than 20 minutes of content. How do I do that? Honestly, break it up into multiple parts. And so I've learned that lesson. I don't always obey it, but yeah. And also something you may not believe me on. And those of you who've done flipped learning, I know some of you out there are avid flippers, I'm sure. But what used to take in class 30 minutes, I could turn into a 10-minute video. I really call it the rule of about 3. It'll cut the presentation of the content by a factor of about 3. I promise that's how it works. As you get better at making videos, if you're making videos, it does work. So number 10, if the videos are too long, you're doing it wrong, okay? Number 9, this is the one that if you do this, your game's over, right? If you lecture when students don't watch, you're doing it wrong. Now, so the big question you're all going to ask, and I'll get to this in a minute, but is, what if they don't watch it, right? Guess what? Some of my students don't watch it. And so I've got to call them on that. But what should I do? Should I then lecture so that every kid can be caught up? No. Because what you're doing is you're communicating to the students who haven't done the pre-work that they didn't have to do the pre-work. And those who did do it, they didn't need to do it. So this will kill your program. Never, ever, never, ever, ever, never do this. All right. Doesn't mean that I won't do mini lectures with a group of 4 or 5 students who need extra help. Do that all the time. That's very common in my class. In fact, we'll see an image or a little video clip of my class, my current classroom, in a little bit. All right. So number 9, if you lecture when students don't watch, then you're doing it wrong. All right. Number 8, I think is becoming less and less of an issue. I made this particular slide quite a few years ago, and that is if you make the content difficult to access. I think the pandemic has really taught us how to get students to get to the content. This little image is maybe hard to see, but this is a teacher, a year 6 teacher in the US, and she just had a QR code, and then the students took notes on this sheet of paper, and of course the QR code took them to a short video on this particular math topic of some kind in the US. So she thought of a super simple way for students to get access. I personally now use a learning management system, so students always go to the same place. They know where to click, the links. You've got to make it so it's easy for students to get to the content, the independence-based stuff. A friend of mine in Australia, he made a comment. He says, if students can have an excuse to not do the work, they will find that excuse. So you need to give them less excuses, because they still will have excuses, right? My students always say, oh, Mr. Bergmann, I didn't do it because of this. And it's like, really, I can't do this assignment because, I lost my copy. I had this one just last couple of days ago. And I said, of course, that's on the website, and you can print up that paper, or you could just, oh yeah, that's right. It's like, yeah, okay. So number 8, if you make it difficult to access, you're doing it wrong. Number 7 is an interesting one, is if the teachers are not active in the classroom. So really the heart and soul of flipped learning is it makes the class more active. It allows you, the teacher, to spend more time walking around helping kids. And I see that as my job. My job is to rove and talk to kids. That's what I do. So make it active. And I've seen teachers who used flipped learning as an excuse to do less work. They'll watch the videos and they sit at their desk. If you're doing that, you're doing it wrong. In fact, let's take a peer into this. I've got 2 videos of my class. This first video is of my class from pre-pandemic. So let's take again. So hopefully you got the idea, right? The idea is that the classroom is active, and in my classroom, the students are all doing different things, and I am walking around roving and talking with students about their progress. And guys, it just works. I could never, ever go back to the way that I did it before. Number 6, if you're not planning for students with incomplete understanding, then you're doing it wrong. So let me explain what this means. Students are going to watch your video, right? Or they're going to do your pre-learning activity. Guess what? Some of them won't get it. They won't understand it. So you need to have a plan in place for those students who won't comprehend it. What are you going to do? So here's a teacher that I met in Texas, in the US. And what he had done is he'd asked the students to watch a video, and he tracked it, by the way, with some tracking software, lots of different tools to do that now. And then at the end, the students answered a 5-question quiz. And so at the beginning of class, he knew who had scored, 1 point, 2 points, 5 points, whatever on the quiz. And the first thing he did, by the way, all right, the first thing he did that I think is intriguing is number 1, he said, he called up 3 students and he said, you know what to do. These are the 3 students who hadn't done the pre-work. They had not watched the video. And he said, get out your laptop and let's have you watch it. They had got some headphones on. This is like 30 students in the class. And so 3 students had not done the work, and he just get going. And then he called up the vast majority of the students, maybe 70% of the students. And these students had scored either 4 points or 5 points on this assessment related to the video. And he said, you're ready to start the assignment? Ready to go. Boom. And then he called up the last group. These are students who had watched the video, but they had not done very well on the assessment. And so what he had them do is he did a mini tutorial. So these kids maybe gotten 3 points or 2 points or something like that. And he spent some time going over the math. It was a math class of what they needed to do. And then he set them to work. But you see, most of the students were able to comprehend the material from the video, but there were some who did not. And so he planned for those with incomplete understanding. So if you don't have a plan for how you're going to deal with students with incomplete understanding, what are you going to do? For me, what I'm doing right now is I'm actually doing, and I'll talk about this later, but I'm doing a system where those students who are more advanced can move on, and those students who need more help don't have to do as much work. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's been a strategy that seems really working for me right now. So if you don't plan for students with incomplete understanding, then you're doing it wrong. All right, number 5, if you don't teach students how to watch an instructional video. This is an important thing. Just because you assign a video doesn't mean they can learn from the video. And one of the reasons they can't learn from the video is that maybe you have not taught them how to watch an instructional video. Now they know how to watch the latest entertainment movie that's coming out of Hollywood or whatever, but what is it that they, how do you watch an instructional video? And I taught, so here's kind of one of my frustrations, truth be told here, Jon's confessions. At the beginning of the year, I spent some time teaching students how to watch the video, how to take notes, how to take notes, how to take notes. Recently, I've had a group of students who have been really struggling. And then honestly, because of all the craziness of life, I have not been checking their notes on their videos. And so I remember I've been checking my struggling students and show me your notes. And on their notes, they got like 4 lines. And it's like, dude, that's not acceptable. I said, all right, sit here and take notes on this video. In fact, I even had provided them, like, here's the 7 things you need to look for in this video. It's like a little outline. And all of a sudden their comprehension went up because they just sort of turned it on and listened to it in the background. And maybe they were TikToking and I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't really learning from the video because they weren't really doing active watching. And even though I taught them how to do active watching, it seems to have been forgotten. And so one reflection I have right now is that I need to hold them more accountable for not just watching it. My software tracks that, but actually doing more than just, passively watching. And so that's actually changed just in the last week, as I have been noticing. I should have noticed it some time ago. That's on me. So if you don't teach students how to watch an instructional video, this is a mistake I've taught them, but I didn't reteach them, I guess. They're doing it wrong. Number 4 is an interesting one. If you don't build in interactivity into the lessons. So this is the pre-work. So the pre-work, I have the students answer some questions. There's actually a research study that says you should have them do a pre-video question if they're doing a video. So they should kind of activate their background knowledge. And that really helps them. So yeah, find some way to build in interactivity. There's lots of software tools. The image that you have on the screen there is from, I think this is the Edpuzzle tool, and it will track how well students answer questions that are embedded inside the video. This is the one I'm using now. It's called Perusal, and these are some different students and their success in different scores. It tracks how many minutes you can see. Chris Anderson, he watched it for 2 minutes, and actually he only did it for 1 minute. So these are short videos where you can see different students in the data that you can get as they watch.
So I'm Adam.
So if you don't build interactivity, you're doing it wrong. Number 3, it's going to be easiest if we watch a short video clip. And I'm going to go 2 slides ahead because I think.
So I'm Adam Johnson from Alabama. I teach 8th grade math. And for 2 years, I flipped using other people's videos. And I met Jon at a conference, and he challenged me to make my own videos and really pushed me. And against my will, I started making my own. Using other people's videos, I had 40 to 60% active participation. After making my own, it shot to 100% active participation. And it extends the level of trust, it gives a personal touch, and that's why I think making my own content is the difference maker. I think that's the game changer in the flipped method.
So I hope you picked up on this. We've got this teacher who came to a conference where I was doing a workshop at, and he says, I've been flipping for a while, Jon. I said, cool. He says, but it's not going well. I said, so what are you doing? And he described his process. And I said, Adam, I think you need to make your own videos. He said, yeah, Jon, that's a lot of extra work. I said, I know. I said, Adam, you need to make your own videos. And he said, but that's a lot of work. And I said, Adam, trust me. And then he went back and he did it, and it changed everything. Because let me address the question. Actually, let's talk about this slide, and I'll address sort of the elephant in the room. So do you create or do you curate? Do you use other people's materials or do you make your own? Right? That's the question that we're addressing right here, right? And it's really a continuum. It's not one answer or the other. And what I'm going to say is ideally you should be on the creation side. And this is the elephant in the room, right? I haven't addressed it. Let's address it right now. Students won't do the work. What do you do? Well, number 1, Adam found out that when he made his own videos, the students felt more buy-in and then they watched the video. I also find that if I hold them accountable, I track them, that they'll do it ahead of time. So the answer is, what if they don't do it? Acknowledge that that's going to happen, and then have a plan. But there's not a plan, there's 10 plans, right? I'm calling home. So I've got students who struggle like you do, right? And so I check their activity log, and I send an email home to their parents and say, turns out your daughter hasn't watched any of these videos. No wonder she's not doing well in class. I don't say it that way. I'm nicer about it, but I say this, and the parents like, oh, really? Okay. I mean, so I'm calling home. I call these good teacher things. You do good teacher things. Honestly, I think one of the key things is to connect with your students and to have them, build a relationship with them, and they'll do a lot for you if you show that you care. Right? So there is not one magic bullet to get them to do the pre-work. The magic bullet is there's 10 bullets. That's a bad word, bullets. There's not one magic way to do this well. It's going to be, you should find the multiple ways to reach different students. So if you make all of your own videos, I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong. I don't make all my own videos. I do most of them though. I think that's a fair way to say it. Number two, if you don't get students involved, I think it's super important to get all people involved. In fact, I should probably expand this slide and not just say students, but I would encourage, especially in the K-12 world, make sure that the parents have got some buy-in too. One thing I've been doing with regard to parents is that I make a 1-minute video and I send it home every week. I just made one a couple of days ago, Friday, I guess it was, Friday, yesterday. Actually, we were off yesterday for school. So Thursday, I sent home a video to the parents, described what was coming up, what to expect, and just that, it's a 1-minute video. Literally, I make a 1-minute summary of what I'm going to do. I just turn on the screen capture program, send it to my students, my families, and they love it. It's just super simple, and the parents are connecting. I also have gotten my students involved. We have conversations about why we're doing what we're doing, and the students buy in. And I'm often giving here right now, by the way, my takes and how Jon does this. But I want you to realize that what I'm talking about is something that's not just happening in Jon's classroom, but hundreds of thousands of classrooms all over the world. I mean, the folks at ABEX have told me so much about how well the books that I was able to privilege to write have done in your region. And that means that many of you have already done this and you have experienced these things. And so you know that this works. And if you are still kicking the tires and are curious about whether or not this works, I got to tell you, it works. So number two, if you don't get other people involved, students, parents, leadership, then you're doing it wrong. And I think the biggest one is this one. Number one, if you don't make the class time active, you need to wear your shoes out by walking around your classroom, assuming you're back to face-to-face, walking around and helping students. Your activity tracker on your phone or your watch should say that you get all your steps in because you are walking around and helping students and creating engaging things. Because the magic of flipped learning does not happen in these cheesy videos that I make. It happens in the class. I mean, next week, my physics students, they're going to be building circuits, and eventually they're going to build motors, and they're going to do all those things. But how will they get the theory about, and again, physicsy things, fit parallel and series circuits? They're going to do that stuff at home so that they can build parallel and series circuits and build electronic devices that work. So that's the 10 steps, if you will, the 10 mistakes that you could make if you were first flipping your class. But now I want to twist. I want to talk about how you can step up to the next level. So truth be told, Jon doesn't flip his class. Wait a minute, you're the founder of Flipped Learning and you don't flip your class? Well, sort of. All right, let me take you on a journey, okay? And it starts with Benjamin Bloom. Bloom's taxonomy guy, right? I don't know if you know this, but even though he made the taxonomy in 1950s, 60s, somewhere in that range, in 1984, he wrote a paper. And he wrote a paper called The Two Sigma Problem, The Search for Methods of Group Instruction That Are as Effective as One-on-One Tutoring. Now, look at the title, just pause for a moment. The Search for Methods of Group Instruction as Effective as One-on-One Tutoring. Turns out that one-on-one tutoring is the best way to learn. In fact, if you do one-on-one tutoring, students get 2 sigma or 2 standard deviation improvement on their learning. So this is a graph. Number one, you can see conventional learning. Mastery learning gives you a 1 standard deviation improvement on student achievement. And then if you do a one-on-one tutorial, then you can get 2 standard deviations. Got the picture? He then, in this same paper, here's a quote, and I'll read it to you. I think it's that important. If the research on the 2 sigma problem yields practical methods that the average teacher or school faculty can learn in a brief period of time and use with little more cost or time than conventional instruction, let me highlight this next bit. It will be a contribution of the greatest magnitude. It would change popular notions about human potential and would have significant effects on what schools can and should do with the educational years each society requires of its young people. This paper is a challenge to us in the educational world, 1984, remember, a long time ago, to find a way that is as effective as one-on-one tutoring, but doesn't cost, so much. Because one-on-one tutoring is super expensive, right? You have to have, one expert teacher with 1 student at a time, or maybe some group of 2. How do you make this work? And I'm going to say right now, boldly, candidly, that solution has been solved. What he challenged us to do, I believe, has been solved by not just flipped, but when you marry flipped with mastery learning. Let's watch a video of what I'm going to call a double sigma class. This is a teacher friend of mine. This is his class. We're just going to hear from one of his students.
This class is more laid back. It's chill, but you're still learning. Like, you're actually letting in the knowledge. It's like the flipped part of it, like you're more independent and you can go at your own pace, but you're still on track. You can't fail. It's kind of impossible to fail this class, to be honest, because you're literally given every resource possible to pass this class. Like, you are able, like, mastery, because you don't move on until you have mastered it. The test, not necessarily, but like your mastery quizzes, like you know them and like the notes, and then the quizzes are with the notes, and like just every resource that you give us helps us to succeed. It's like you know what you're going to be doing, and you can go ahead. Like, you go at your own pace, you can go ahead, you can be a little bit behind because you get time in class to also work on your stuff. We are capable of learning it on our own with all the resources that you give us.
I hope you heard that. This girl, it's mastery class. And in the mastery learning, there's a mastery cycle. And the students start with clear objectives, or you start with clear objectives. Then there's a rubric. There's assessments. They get assessed. The beauty of mastery, you know this, you had to pass your driving test probably. And if you didn't pass, then you had to take it again. And you had to go back and learn how to drive better. This is the idea, is that that's what happens. And there's a rubric. This is actually from one of my classes. I've created a 3-part rubric. I sort of get it, I get it, or I really get it. So my students have 3 levels of mastery that they can attain as they're working through content. And I've just finished a book on this topic, coming out in October, soon to be released book that talks about mastery learning. Let's take a look inside my classroom today. What does a mastery learning classroom look like? A flipped mastery learning classroom. hopefully you've got the picture, right? I call it the 10-ring circus of learning. Students are all doing something slightly different, and they're moving through the content at what we'll call a flexible pace. And I know I've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to just race through these. I'm going to give you just kind of the big picture of doing a flipped mastery classroom, and then we'll deal with some questions. So in a flipped mastery classroom, you will find that there is no whole group instruction. I have not lectured since 2007. So my students watch these cheesy videos that I've made so they can move at their, actually we call it a flexible pace. That's actually number 2. They can move at a flexible pace. So there's, by the way, if you say their own pace, my experience is some students won't have a pace. If I say, oh, move at your own pace, some will just bog down and never learn anything. And so you have to give them some kind of a schedule. And again, I can go into details. I have a whole book coming out on how to do this stuff with flexible pace. I think maybe the most powerful thing about flipped learning is that I can do extreme differentiation. I can really, students get a different education depending upon their ability level and where they're at. So some students, my students just recently took an exam, and on this exam, they were actually 3 different exams. They could take the I sort of get it, or the I get it, or the I totally get it tests. And my students are all choosing, that's like choose your own adventure, and it just works. And teacher-student interactions have gone way up. I can really interact with my students. That was true in a flipped classroom, but it's even more true now. I mean, although it doesn't make it harder as a teacher, because I have to switch my thinking. I'm working with an advanced student. The next one I'm working with a remedial student, and I'm switching over because I'm walking around helping kids and doing lots of formative assessments. One thing that's true that you'll always find is that students always work together. It's amazing to watch just the social interactions that students have in my class. You saw that in that short video clip, and it just works. And you also saw me in that video doing formative assessments. I'm walking around with a clipboard and I am assessing students' work. We had great conversations just in the last few days just about the nature of light. So that was the topic in my chemistry classes. Where does light come from, and how does it work with electrons and photons and wavelengths, and they had to explain it back to me in just the rich conversations. And I was able to pick up on their misconceptions that they have. Oh yeah, and that is happening in the formative assessments. But then there still is a summative assessment. I still believe that students should get a summative assessment. So at the end of a unit, my students did this last Thursday, I guess it was. And actually they'll take the next group will take it on Monday. I've got 2 groups. Every other day I see my students. So they'll take a summative assessment, and depending on how well they do in a mastery system, my students have to score 80% before they can get credit. And if they don't get 80%, then they have to take it again. And that has just worked so well for students. And if that's the case, of course, if a student can take a test again after they have failed it, whatever I've determined as the line they need to pass, then how do I do that? Honestly, number 8 is that I've created what I call thousands of versions of tests. And what I've done is that with my learning management system, many of them do this. The one my school has chosen is something called Desire to Learn Brightspace. So my students are in Brightspace. They take their tests in Brightspace in a secure lockdown browser. And then they take that, then you can, they get different tests. It has to do with test question banks. So I might write 10 questions for one topic or one objective, a clear objective, and then the students might be pitched 2 of those questions randomly. So the questions change every time they take the test. Number 9 is that I'm getting immediate feedback. One thing my students love is that right when they finish their summative assessment, then I'm going to grade it with them, and I'll go over and remediate with them and figure out what is that you're doing wrong right now. And that has been super helpful. So they're not waiting a week for me to, grade the tests and then see how they did. That never happens. And then I think number 10, the thing that's the most important is that it's all about relationships. You can connect with students. I know my students so much better now than I ever have because I am roaming and talking to kids. That's my job. And that is ultimately all of our jobs, I think. So let's finish up with just a few more quick thoughts. And that is, there's really one key question I think that we need to address, and that is this: what's the best use of your face-to-face class time? So if you decide to do flipped learning, I bet it's not you standing up and lecturing. If you want to go deeper and do mastery learning, then it's going to be much deeper. I think that's what the question needs. So what is that for me? I want my students to think deeply. I want them to do more experiments. I want them to do that. If you're a language teacher, maybe you teach English or you teach Spanish or whatever it is, or you teach a world language, and there you want them to practice speaking the language. What is the best use of your class time? I encourage you to think that question through. And I want us to think of COVID not just as a tragedy, which it is, by the way, but also I want us to think of it as an opportunity for us to really deeply think through what we need to do with our classrooms. And let me close with a series of pictures. You remember I started the lecture out here with a series of pictures of classrooms all over the world. Well, I reached out to the people. I've had a great chance to visit many schools all over the world and meet many flip teachers all over the world, some right in your region and every place in the world. And I asked them to send me pictures of their classrooms. What do their classrooms look like now? Most of these are pre-COVID, but this is what their flipped and their flip mastery classrooms look like. And here is what one looks like in Iceland. Remember, this is a school I talked about that was a school for the dropouts, right? Here is one in Taiwan, one of the great flipped learning teachers on the planet. What an amazing teacher. Here's my friend Khalid in Morocco, who teaches, he's actually the principal at an English school or English language school in Morocco. And do you see the interactions that's happening? Here's a flipped classroom from a professor friend of mine in Singapore. And I mentioned this one already at Harvard Medical School. I got a chance to visit this very classroom. And here is the first flipped elementary school, I think, in the world, in sheep country in Australia. So it's a primary school, and they have flipped their classroom. My friend's class in Hong Kong, Nigeria, United Kingdom, friend of mine in Spain, friend of mine in Australia, in China. This is around the corner. I used to live in Chicago. I now live in Texas, but this was a school right around the neighborhood where I used to live. Argentina, remember I talked about Argentina and what they're doing in Misiones. And then here's my class. Guys, it can be done. Let me make a bold statement as I close. If you and your region were to adopt flipped learning, and actually even more specifically mastery learning, sometimes called competency-based learning, it would change everything in your country, right? So maybe you're from Syria. I got a chance to visit with, I think, the assistant minister of education when I was in, or actually I was in Jordan, and maybe you are in wherever you are at. I would say that it would change everything if you were to adopt flipped learning. It would take your country and raise your test scores to some of the top test scores in the world if you were to do this. It's that big a deal. This is that big a deal. If you change how you teach, it will change everything. So my question for you is, will you go back? Will you choose to go back to the old way that you taught? I mean, the pandemic has changed everything, right? It changed everything in your classroom, and you had to adopt some flipped learning principles. You had no choice. But are you going to go back to the old way? And I would encourage you, don't do it. Don't do it. And again, that country that adopts this model first will win. I really believe that strongly. Well, I encourage you, if you want to learn more about me, I've got a website, jonbergmann.com. Hop on my website. I send out probably once a month a quick little email that tells you about what's going on, upcoming ideas and books. There's a community where you can ask questions about things. So go to my website. My name is spelled weird, by the way. Jon has no H and Bergmann has 2 N's. Yeah, the curse of my name.com. So I encourage you to visit there. It's been a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. Yeah, so now, thank you very much. And I think we're going to switch to questions.
شكرا جوناثان على هذا العرض الرائع، العرض الثري الذي تناولت فيه تقريبا جميع محاور اللقاء الثالث من سلسلة اللقاءات التربوية. وفي الحقيقة لدي سيل كبير جدا من الأسئلة، وأيضا كذلك الثناء والإطراء على ما قدمته من الاستراتيجيات، وأيضا كذلك ويبدو أنك يعني متأثر بالجانب العملي والجانب النظري أيضا كذلك. فكونك معلم صف دراسي يحتك بالطلاب خلال مسيرتك 30 سنة الماضية، وأيضا كذلك مؤلف مختص في مجال التعلم المقلوب، يبدو أن ذلك أثر على مستوى الخبرة التي تناولتها في هذا اللقاء المميز. هناك العديد من الأسئلة سأتناولها تقريبا بواحدا تلو الآخر، فأمامنا نصف ساعة، وأطلب من الزملاء أيضا كذلك يعني كتابة الأسئلة لمن يريد الأسئلة والمداخلة مع الضيف. جون، هناك إن سمحت لي مغالطة لدى بعض المعلمين في تعريف الصف المقلوب أو التعلم المقلوب، فربما يفهم على أنه عكس مكان وزمان إجراء التعلم، بينما في الحقيقة أن التعلم المقلوب هو عكس محور التركيز من المعلم إلى الطالب. فكيف تنصح المعلمين حول هذه المغالطة التي قد تحدث عند بعضهم؟
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's think of it this way. You've got let me back up. I was at a conference speaking in China, and the professor there, he asked me a very interesting question. He said, John, I understand that flipped learning works. And he asked the question, why? He says, I understand it works, but tell me why it works. And as I have read the research, as I have talked with hundreds, maybe thousands of flipped teachers across the world, I think there's two answers. The reason that flipped learning works is, number one, is that it forces teachers to active learning. And active learning takes many, many paths. It could be a project-based learning, move towards that. It could be more experiments, like it could be more discussion. It could be many, many things. And so I would say that's active learning. So there's a research study out by the University of California at Berkeley that says active learning is, she said, this is the professor who wrote the article, is the grand meta principle that makes good learning good. But then the second thing that came out of my mouth as I was talking to Professor Shi was relationships. And what happens in a flipped learning class is, because you have more time to spend with your students, you get to know your students better. And when you get to know your students better, then it just works better. So I would say the answer is the mixture of active learning and relationships.
أيضا لدي سؤال من أحد ضيوف الحضور، يقول: من تخصصك في تدريس العلوم أو الكيمياء، لكن كيف استعرضت تقريبا خبرتك في توظيف التعلم المقلوب في معالجة الفاقد التعليمي، لكن كيف يكون التعلم المقلوب فعالا في تدريس العلوم الإنسانية كاللغة العربية ومواد التربية الإسلامية وغيرها من المواد في العلوم الإنسانية؟ هل يمكن أن يوظف بنفس الطريقة التي توظف في تدريس العلوم الرياضيات؟
The answer, of course, is yes, but it also is different. So I wrote, I'm not sure if ABEX has these books, I should have looked ahead of time, but my co-founder, Aaron Sams, we wrote 5 books, one on flipping the humanities classes, math classes, science classes, history classes, and elementary classes. So we actually talked about some of the specifics on what it looks like to do it differently in different classes. Again, it's still the big same idea. I have a friend who teaches lots of project-based learning. He's a history professor, and the students do many, many more project-based things. And he's got these videos on the different topics of the history of whichever history he's teaching, and it works very well. I actually use this myself in my church. I'm a Bible study teacher. So in religious education, I flip. I have flipped that. I continue. I did it Tuesday night, just recently with it's a group of adults that I teach, and we flip the religious education. So I ask this question: what's the best use of my time? And I want to have a deeper discussion. And so instead of them doing pre-work, these are busy people with important jobs, at the beginning of the Bible study, is that we will spend some time, and we will look at a passage of the scripture, and I will give them 10 to 15 minutes of quiet time for them to read it There'll be a series of maybe questions for them to respond to, but it's just quiet. And then we begin our discussion about the meaning and the applications of the scriptures to our lives. If I was teaching religious education as a ongoing thing, I would have them do the pre-learning work again, so that we can have a deeper conversation about the importance of what we're studying, etc. In terms of languages, somebody mentioned languages. I've seen this work in all kinds of languages. If you're teaching, you're trying to learn a foreign language, or maybe you're trying to study. My son, for example, is a Christian pastor, and then in his courses, he had to learn Greek and he had to learn Hebrew to study the scriptures. And as he was doing that, of course, he wished that he had had a teacher that taught in flipped learning so that he could practice using his Greek or his Hebrew as he was studying it when he was with the professor. And so, yeah, it really works in all subjects. There are research study after research study demonstrating that it works not just in math and physics and science, but also in the humanities.
جيد. إذا التعلم المقلوب هو استراتيجية يمكن استخدامها في تدريس أي مادة من المواد الدراسية في الصف الدراسي. هناك سؤال من أحد الزملاء أيضا كذلك من خلال تناولك للاستراتيجيات العشر التي وظفتها في التعلم المقلوب، ما هي الأدوات الرقمية التي يمكن أن تساعد المعلم في تطبيق الصف المقلوب؟ هل هناك أدوات رقمية تنصح بها؟
Yes, that's a great question. The tools that I am noticing the most now is there's a tool that was developed by a Harvard professor, a friend of mine, Eric Mazur, created a tool called Perusall, Perusall.com. I think I could put this in the chat. Chat, Perusall. So that's the tool that I have all my videos posted to, and it keeps track of who's doing that. Another one that I have started playing around with, I'm actually doing a test of them. My students actually have said they like this one better, formative.com. And then kind of the granddaddy one that most people use is one called edpuzzle.com. Each of these websites, you upload a video or you link a video from YouTube. There's different strategies, and then you can build in interactivity, and it tracks student work. And those are the three tools that I would recommend. There's also tools in terms of how to make your videos. There's lots of ways to make videos. I'm sure many of you know there's screen capture ways to make videos, or as I'm standing here, right? I'm standing in my own studio, and this is my light board. So I shoot videos right here in this room. I have a light board studio, and I shoot with that camera at that spot. My school has recently purchased that, and a light board studio, and it's about 10 times better than this one. So I have not used this for quite some time because my school has a better one, and which is great. So a light board is where I write on this screen. It's black. It's a piece of glass, as you can see, but I write, and then the lights all light up, and then the software flips the image. It looks like I'm writing backwards, but I'm not. I'm writing forwards, but the software flips the image, and it works really well. So there's lots of ways to make a video. I don't know if I want to go into detail. I'm glad to if you want that.
هناك أيضا سؤال يتعلق في مقاطع الفيديو المستخدمة. هل هناك فيديوهات معتمدة يجب أن يعتني بها المعلم وأن يرجع إليها، أم أن المعلم يستطيع بناء فيديوهات خاصة به؟ هذا السؤال. وهل الفيديوهات أو طريقة التعلم المقلوب معنية بعمر محدد للطلاب؟
Yeah, in terms of age groups, like I said, Harvard Medical School adults have done this. And then it's also working at the primary school level and everything in between. So the studies are showing that it works at all levels and all subjects. Again, it works in engineering and math, but in languages and everything you can think of. So if you look at the research on this, you'll find that it works at all levels and all topics. It looks a little different. but I mean, it's still the same idea. What's the best use of your class time? It's going to look very, me as a science teacher, I'm going to do more experiments. For you, if you're a history teacher, you want to have a deeper discussion, maybe a debate about the meaning of why something happened, why did such and such, kingdom invade such and such a kingdom in such and such a year. And it's a deeper question of why, not what happened, but why did it happen? So those are the types of questions you want to, maybe that's a debate or a conversation or a Socratic seminar or a paper where they're going to take on the role of, I'm thinking of a specific example, a teacher who had the students take on the role of one of the emperors of China as they were studying Chinese history, and what would be his response to such and such. Like some of them even had Twitter chats, fake Twitter chats between two different world leaders what would their conversation look like if they were doing a Twitter chat, that kind of a thing.
شكرا لك جوناثان. هناك سؤال آخر يتعلق ب cooperative learning، التعلم التعاوني. ما علاقة التعلم التعاوني بالتعلم المقلوب؟ هل هناك ارتباط بينهما؟
Yeah, I actually had a chance to speak with the guys who invented cooperative learning. We both spoke at the same conference and spent 3 or 4 days together. The brothers from Wisconsin, I had lost their name. What was it, Williams? Anyways, we had just a fascinating conversation, and their whole point is that flipped learning just allows more opportunity for you to do deeper learning strategies, and cooperative learning is one of those strategies. And I know sometimes when I first heard about cooperative learning when I was in my young career, I heard, cooperative learning is where my kids work together. And there's truth to that, but if you really study their work, the two brothers, you'll discover that their point is that there's a much more specific sort of step-by-step guides on how to do this well. And the beauty is that because the students are going to get the material ahead of time, if you will, the introduction to the material, let me say that, they're not going to learn everything ahead of time. Don't expect them to learn everything ahead of time. But now we've at least got a common language, a common experience, watching a video, reading a text, so that when we are going to do an activity, whether it's cooperative learning or project-based learning or whatever it might be, now we can do that more effectively. It's just going to, ultimately, it's a time game. You get more time to do that stuff, right? You have more time because if you're not lecturing at all, then you don't have to do, you have more time to do things like cooperative learning or project-based learning or whatever it is the best strategy for you in that lesson. I change my strategies in my classes depending upon what the lesson is. So we did an inquiry activity recently, and that was the best activity to learn the concept of atomic theory. And so that was an inquiry. And then at the end of the year, they're going to do a project. So I changed the deeper learning strategy dependent upon the lesson, but the introduction to the material is done mostly with these videos. I also have some readings. My physics students will do a reading next week, week after next. I'm probably about 90% videos and 10% text. But like when I was at Harvard Medical School, they were the reverse. I mean, they were 90% text pre-work, 10% video. So it depends on the content. There's a lot of reasons why you choose one or the other. It all depends on your contents.
شكرا لك جوناثان. احنا باقي معنا تقريبا 15 دقيقة والأسئلة ما زالت تتوالى جوناثان. الحديث يعني كما يقال في اللغة العربية ذو شجون حول موضوع اللقاء اليوم. هناك سؤال يتعلق بتوظيف التعلم المقلوب في الصفوف الدراسية ذات الكثافة العالية والمزدحمة. كيف يمكن تطبيق خطوات التعلم المقلوب في تلك الصفوف؟
I had a chance to have a conversation with a professor. I can give two of them right now, professors who have maybe 1,000 students in their classes, and they have done flipped learning. One at Monash University, he breaks the students into groups of 50 for workshops, and then they do the active learning in the workshops with his graduate assistants. And then another professor who teaches large lecture hall classes, he's a chemistry professor at Ohio State University. And so he's maybe got 1,000 students in the class, a very large class, maybe it's 300, I don't know, the big numbers. And so the students will work and do questions together and like little problems just in this, he's still in a, kind of a confined space that's obviously designed for him to lecture, but it's all about him having them do activities in that class in small cooperative groups. And then he used a tool, I forget what it's called, that kind of tracks, he's using peer instruction, where the students are going to get a question that they're going to first have to respond to on their own. And then they're doing this with some technology tool. I'm trying to think, it's called learning analytics or learning catalytics or some tool like that. And then the students respond through, some kind of technology tool. Then they work together to solve the problem. And then they come together and have these conversations. So he's doing this with large groups of students. Obviously, it's always better to have smaller groups of students. I wish I had smaller classes. We all do. And we know education always works better if I've got smaller groups of students, but it still works in large groups as well. So, yeah.
هناك أسئلة تقريبا سؤالين أو ثلاثة تدور حول الوقت اللازم والضروري لاستراتيجية الصف المقلوب. هل هي جزء من الحصة أم الحصة كاملة ممكن تكون بالتعلم المقلوب؟
So if I understand the question right, I think what you're asking is how much time do I, as the teacher, need to prepare to do well to flip your classroom? And so I don't have really good news for you. Well, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that once you've done a lot of the work, then it's easier. So the first year that I teach a new course is a lot of work because I have to design the curriculum. I have to, if I'm going to create videos, I have to create the videos, and that is a lot of work. It is a lot of work. So the bad news is that I'm not asking you to do something easy. I'm asking you to do something hard. But let me tell you is that once you do it, you'll never go back. It will change how you teach and what you think about education. I mean, I can't ever go back. I literally have not lectured in class to all my students since 2007. That doesn't mean I don't do some whole group activity. As a chemistry professor, I will do demonstrations to the whole class, maybe 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of class, and then the students have time to work on the different things that they're doing. So I can't make you shifting to flipped learning easy because it is work. It's a lot of work. But it's good. So I hope that was the question. Was that the question? Did I get the question right, by the way?
نعم، هذا هو السؤال تحديدا وقد تمت الإجابة عليه. جوناثان، شكرا لك. هنا سؤال يدور حول تقريبا أنا سأجمعهم في سؤال واحد، هم على الطرفين نقيض. السؤال يقول، السؤال الأول: ما مدى فعالية التعلم المقلوب في الصفوف الأولية؟ هذا الشق أو السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني: ما مدى جدوى استخدام التعلم المقلوب في المرحلة الجامعية؟
Well, the studies are showing that it works, and it works at all levels, all topics. And so my encouragement is for you to figure out what that looks like in your class. Again, I would take you back to that if you're a graduate professor teaching graduate studies, or if you are teaching primary school, what's the best use of your face-to-face class time? My guess is you know the answer to that question. What is that? And it's not you standing up and yakking at your students, It's going to be something else. You still need to, hear me carefully. I still think it's important that you create some content so they can be introduced to the topic. So I still yak at my students. I still talk to them through these videos that I make. So I still believe in lecture, okay? But the lecture I've moved it to, as we said earlier, the independent space, so that the group space, when I'm face-to-face with my students, again, that could have been in a Zoom room. I know professors and teachers who teach in online settings who do flipped learning, but they've got some asynchronous time in a Zoom room maybe to meet with their students, and they need to say, what am I going to do with that time? And if you're just going to reteach something that they could learn on a video, I'd argue that's not a very good use of your time.
شكرا لك جوناثان. هنا سؤال يتعلق بأدوات التقويم. كيف نقيم الطلاب باستراتيجية التعلم المقلوب؟ ما هي أدوات التقييم خصوصا في التعلم عن بعد؟
So I don't think that flipped learning necessarily, if you will, takes a position on assessment. When I first flipped my class, and this was in our first book, which I know you guys translated, we gave the exact same test that we had done before we flipped our classroom. And then we saw one standard deviation improvement in our test scores. So we did not change one test. We didn't change one question. We gave the exact same assessments. So you don't have to change how you assess, and I'm not sure there's a particular tool, but here's something that I've noticed amongst flipped learning teachers is that as they become a flipped learning teacher, they begin to rethink assessment. And they begin to wonder if our traditional testing systems are still valid. And they go through an evolution. I have gone through an evolution about doing more assessment, not just of learning, but assessment for learning, where the learning itself is the assessment, which looks more like projects and things like that, instead of the traditional paper and pencil type test. And so I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but for me, I do give assessments that students have to do practical things, say in a science lab. But I also use a tool. I mean, I just use my learning management system. Maybe you've got Canvas or Brightspace like I have, or maybe you have Blackboard or Schoology, and maybe there's some tools in your region that are more specific to your region. I don't know. But those also have pretty robust assessment suites that you can use to do assessment that tend to be a little bit more, that's for the more traditional side. But the reason I like those is that I have the ability to have them pull from a folder of questions that assess the same objective, so that when they take the test on their laptops or devices, that they get a different set of questions. So I could have students, I do have students in the same room. What will happen on Monday? I'll have students all taking the same test on Monday. And actually not the same test. Some will take, even though they might have the same test from the computer perspective, they're getting a different set of questions to assess the same objectives. So, and I'm using my learning management system, Brightspace, to do that.
شكرا لك جوناثان. هنا سؤال يقول يبدو أن السؤال هذا سؤال عريض ويحتاج إلى وقت. ما التحديات التي تواجه المعلم لتنفيذ استراتيجية الصف المقلوب أو التعلم المقلوب، وما هي الحلول المقترحة لها؟
Yeah, I would argue there's probably, I don't know, 3 or 4. Number one, the most important struggle is to change the mindset of the teacher. What is it that, are you willing to rethink education and what education and how education is delivered? Again, flipped learning is agnostic with regard to curriculum. You can teach whatever you want. So it's not applicable. I mean, I teach physics, but it also works in history and it works in math and religious education. So, but the biggest hurdle I've seen for teachers is to switch their mindset. The second biggest hurdle is time. To have the time to make this transition. This, like I said earlier, is a huge amount of work. And where I have seen this take off across the world is where leadership, and I know many of you who are in this webinar are leaders of your schools, maybe even of your systems. You might even be a minister of education of your country, but how are you going to provide the time and the training for your teachers to learn how to do this well? And when you want to do this at a large scale, and I've had a chance to work with large scale implementations of flipped learning, that's where it's so critical that leadership is on board and thinks through, particularly the training and the time piece, right? The mindset stuff, sometimes what you need is you need somebody to convince you that this is the best way to go. And then the teacher says, all right, I'm willing to give it a shot. But then it's important that they get appropriate training and then get appropriate time. And time, I know, and training costs money. And I think that, but again, this would require an investment of leadership in your region to say this is important. When they say yes, it is, then you can make that happen. Those are the big challenges, I would say. Mindset, training, and time.
سنقتصر الوقت على آخر سؤالين. السؤال الأول من آخر سؤالين: هل يمكن استخدام استراتيجية التعلم المقلوب مع طلاب الاحتياجات الخاصة خصوصا ذوي الإعاقة؟ وهل تختلف من حالة إلى حالة؟
Yeah, the beauty of flipped learning with our special needs populations is that many of them are, at least the students that I have, for lack of a better term, I teach our lower level students at our school. In our school, the kids who, many of them have special needs. They've got dyslexia, they've got these kinds of things, dysphoria, dysgraphia. So they've got these different needs. And the beauty is that they get more attention in a flipped learning classroom. And I find that is the beauty of flipped learning. And then our special needs teachers like that they are in a class where they get a more individual attention. Again, if I was standing up and lecturing, how am I going to really provide for the needs of those students? And the beauty is in a flipped learning classroom that I can meet the needs of more of the needs. I mean, it's not perfect, right? Because students still struggle. And, you know, sometimes I have special needs teachers who are upset that the kid isn't doing super well. And that still happens. I still have students who fail my class. But now I have more time to work with those students and one-on-one times. And I'm thinking of a few students. It's like, all right, you need to just come in and see me and spend more time with me, even above and beyond the classroom time, because you have some needs that aren't being met in the class. And I would say one thing that I've discovered recently that I'm trying and figure out how to solve. If you know the answer, I want the answer. Is that a flipped learning classroom can be somewhat, especially a flipped mastery classroom, can be somewhat chaotic. And because different students are doing different things at the same time. And my students who are ADHD in particular have struggled with that level of freedom. And they get distracted easily by their peers. And then the time during the class is not being used as well as it could be. And so this has been one of my struggles this year. And I think it's been heightened by COVID too, is that these students are coming in with even less skills to be focused. And so I don't know what the solution is. This is something I am struggling with. So maybe the question that somebody asked earlier, who does it not work with? My ADHD students are struggling more than they have in the past. I'm trying to figure out how to provide for them. But I'm not sure it would have worked if I was standing up and lecturing either. I think it's still a better mousetrap to do it this way, but I'm still struggling right now. I'm struggling with the level of distraction that some students have in my class.
شكرا جوناثان. السؤال الأخير في أمسية هذه الليلة سؤال يتعلق تقريبا يقول: أنا أكلف طلابي في مرحلة الماجستير أو المرحلة الجامعية بتحضير الموضوعات مسبقا بدون توظيف التكنولوجيا وعرضها في الجزء الأول من المحاضرة، ثم نناقش مع الطلاب الأخطاء التي وقع فيها الطلاب وبالتالي نصحح ذلك. هل ذلك يعتبر تعلما مقلوبا بدون استخدام وتوظيف التكنولوجيا؟
Yeah, I don't think that you have to have technology necessary to do flip. The key is there is a pre-learning activity, whether that's on technology or not on technology, so that they come prepared to class to do something active and for them to discuss their findings without technology. I think is a very powerful thing. I mean, our students are way too connected to their devices. I think we are too connected to our devices, and we are distracted, I think, even ourselves. And honestly, I think that those who will be the winners in the world will be those who learn how to live without distractions. And I think there's no doubt that we are in most distracted generation in the history of the world because of these devices that beep and chime and do whatever they do to us. And I think we've got to find ways to become focused humans. And as we become focused humans, then we will be the ones who win in the long run. I mean, if you look at the leaders of the world who are doing the best changes in the world, they are people who've learned how to focus and turn off all of their notifications, and they turn their phones off so they can get work done. And whoa, how we need that to teach our students how to do that so that they can be the leaders that we want them to be.
شكرا لك جوناثان بيرغمان على هذا الإجابة على الأسئلة جميعها. وفي الحقيقة لدينا الكثير من الأسئلة التي لم نستطيع أن نصل إليها كافة بسبب الوقت. باسم مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج نتقدم بجزيل الشكر والتقدير لضيفنا وخبيرنا في هذه الليلة في اللقاء الثالث من سلسلة اللقاءات التربوية السيد جوناثان بيرغمان. وأيضا كذلك نتقدم بالشكر الجزيل لكم أيها الحضور. فهذه الأمسية ما يقارب 600 من الضيوف الأعزاء من كافة الدول الأعضاء والدول العربية، ونرحب بكم أيضا كذلك في لقاءاتنا القادمة وفي برامج المكتب القادمة. ضيفنا جوناثان بيرغمان، نحن تشرفنا كما تحدثنا في البداية بترجمة 3 كتب له، وإن شاء الله ستكون بيننا وبينه علاقة من خلال التواصل يعني والعلاقة المستمرة مع دور النشر المتميزة وأيضا كذلك المؤلفين المتميزين، في أن يكون المكتب حاضرا مثل حضوره المستمر، وأيضا كذلك في تغطية المواضيع والمجالات ذات الاهتمام في منظومة العمل التربوي المشترك في الدول الأعضاء. وأنا أيضا كذلك أعيد لكم مرة أخرى باركود المتجر اللي هو متجر المكتب لكافة إصدارات المكتب والمراكز التابعة له. بإمكانكم مسح الباركود والوصول مباشرة إلى كافة الإصدارات. لا يسعني في ختام هذا اللقاء إلا أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر والتقدير أيضا كذلك إلى مترجم اللغة ومترجم لغة الإشارة الذين حضروا معنا بتميز، وأيضا كذلك تميزوا في إيصال المعلومة من خلال الترجمة. وأيضا كذلك شكري وتقديري للزملاء في إدارة التقنية وللزملاء في إدارة تطوير الأعمال، والشكر الأعظم لمعالي المدير العام الدكتور عبد الرحمن محمد العاصمي لدعمه المستمر لإبراز جهود المكتب بتميز لكافة الفئات المستفيدة. أسأل الله عز وجل لي ولكم التوفيق، وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته، وتصبحون على خير.